She walked into Mass and never returned. Welcome to Midnight Radio Drama. I am your host, Wilfred. Drop a comment with where you're watching from. I love seeing our listeners connect. Now let's uncover the truth. Midnight Mass in Flaxborough had always been regarded as a safe form of pageantry. The church, draughty but resplendent in candlelight, gave the townspeople an opportunity to prove themselves pious for at least one evening a year without risking overexertion. The organist, Mr. Carrow, wheezed through carols with a determination that suggested both lungs and bellows were equally asthmatic. Pew cushions creaked. Elderly ladies stifled coughs as if each suppressed note were a minor act of worship. The peculiar incident occurred, as these things usually do, not with a bang, but with a murmur. The murmur came from the south transept, where the small order of visiting sisters from St. Winifred's convent had installed themselves. 6 of them had entered at the start of the service, black-clad, eyes lowered, each moving as if they feared even the echo of their shoes might trespass on sacred ground. But when the procession left the altar at the service's end, only 5 remained. It was the stout Mrs. Babbitt, a woman whose devotion to both incense and information gathering was legendary, who first pointed this out. She did so in a voice carefully pitched to carry at least 4 pews ahead and behind. "Where's the other one gone, then?" she demanded, poking her husband in the ribs as though he had been personally responsible. "There were 6, George. Don't you shake your head at me. 6. The matter, at first, was treated with indulgent shrugs. A nun might have stepped out, faintness perhaps, or the pressing urgency of cloistered digestion. But as parishioners filed into the chill December night, the notion took on the weight of strangeness. By the time the vicar, Reverend Toop, reached his modest rectory, the disappearance had already been discussed with the fervour of a scandal. Mrs. Babbitt had passed the news to her sister-in-law, who whispered it to the grocer's wife, who in turn confided it to a taxi driver, who naturally related it to the last lingering worshippers as if it were a public announcement. Thus it came to be generally agreed, before dawn had properly broken, that a nun had been spirited away during the holy service, and that the explanation was unlikely to be either innocent or immediate. Inspector Purbright heard of it not from the police switchboard, which was typically reserved for burglaries and missing hens, but from Sergeant Love, whose landlady had returned from church in an excited state, convinced that a papist abduction had taken place in full view of the altar. Only 5 went out. "Sir," Love reported, as though nuns were best counted like coal sacks. "Mrs. Brackley says the one missing wore red shoes." Rather odd, she thought, for a sister. Purbright, at his desk, looked up mildly from his untouched tea. "Red shoes?" "That's what she swears, sir." The inspector made no comment. He merely set down his cup and, with the slow solemnity of a man lowering a lid onto something faintly distasteful, closed his notebook. The vanishing itself was unusual enough. The shoes, however, had introduced a note of deliberate wrongness. And deliberate wrongness in Flaxborough was seldom without a human motive. When Purbright rose from his chair, Love assumed they were bound for the convent. Instead, the inspector walked to the window and peered out at the frost-speckled market square. "Sergeant," he said gently, "before we trouble the good sisters, I think we had best call at Mrs. Babbitt's. Nuns may vanish quietly, but gossip leaves a very audible trail." Mrs. Babbitt received Inspector Purbright and Sergeant Love in her sitting-room with an air of triumphant solemnity, as if the disappearance of a nun at midnight mass had been staged purely to confirm her reliability. as Flaxborough's premier authority on other people's business. She was a plump woman in her late 60s with a bosom that gave the impression of having been engineered for fortification rather than mere support. The room smelt faintly of mothballs and boiled cabbage, though on the occasional breath of air from the coal fire there wafted something sharper, lavender water applied without mercy. "I told George there was something amiss," she began, fixing her husband with a glare. George Babbitt, sunk into an armchair as if hoping to be mistaken for a cushion, emitted the faint grunt of a man who had long since given up denying his wife anything, including omniscience. "6 they came in, 5 they went out. Don't you contradict me, George." "Wouldn't dream of it, my dear," mumbled George, without raising his eyes from the carpet pattern. Purbright inclined his head politely. "You are certain of the number, Mrs. Babbitt? I only ask because such matters can look different depending on where one is seated." "Oh, I was seated where I always am," she replied crisply. "Third pew from the front, right-hand side, next to the pillar that blocks George's view, though that doesn't matter. He wouldn't notice if they marched an elephant down the aisle with a collection plate. 6 they were. I counted them twice, and I noticed that one of them wore red shoes. I said to myself at the time, that isn't proper nun's footwear, not for midnight mass or any other hour of the day." Sergeant Love, who was writing furiously in his notebook, though with less understanding than he hoped he conveyed, looked up. "You're sure they were red, madam? Could it have been the light?" "I know red when I see it, young man," Mrs. Babbitt retorted. "I've been dyeing curtains since before you were born. Burgundy, scarlet, crimson, I can tell you every shade between a poppy and a beetroot. They were red shoes, and they creaked. "Brand new!" Purbright, his expression betraying nothing beyond mild absorption, asked, "And you say that particular sister is the one who failed to leave with the rest?" "I do, the one with the red shoes. I looked for her when the others walked out at the end. 5 of them, no 6th. I turned to George and said, where's the red shoes?" But George, of course, was asleep on his feet. George gave a small groan of defence. "It was a long sermon, Inspector." Purbright allowed the corners of his mouth to soften in something like sympathy. "Did you see her leave at any point during the service?" "No. And that's the funny thing. She was there during the readings, I remember, because she sneezed. Very delicate sneeze it was, like a kitten. Not at all like Sister Euphemia from the convent school, who sounds like a gun going off. After the sermon I didn't notice her again. Then, when the recessional began, gone." Love looked up with eager suspicion. "Could she have gone to the lavatory, sir?" Mrs. Babbitt emitted a snort of scorn. "During midnight mass? What sort of nun goes wandering off to the lavatory in the middle of the Gloria? Besides, the church lavatories are outside, round by the vestry, and it was freezing. A woman would catch her death out there, and if she did, why didn't she come back?" Purbright let the pause hang gently in the air, as though the silence itself might elicit an overlooked fact. But none was forthcoming, only Mrs. Babbitt watching him with expectant relish. At length he said, "I am most obliged to you, Mrs. Babbitt. You have given us a very clear account. I shall, of course, make some discreet inquiries at the convent. In the meantime, might I ask you to refrain from further discussion of the matter, at least until we have clarified the position?" Mrs. Babbitt looked as if she had been asked to stop breathing. "Well, of course, Inspector, if you think it best, though people will notice. They already have, in fact. Mrs. Brackley was saying only this morning that Sister Gertrude's face was white as a sheet when she came out, and Mr. Bostock, who drives the taxis, told me one of the nuns asked him the way to the railway station yesterday afternoon. They notice things, Inspector, not just me." "I'm sure they do," said Purbright mildly. When at last he and Love emerged into the frosty street, the sergeant asked with some perplexity, "Do you think it really was a nun, sir? Only red shoes, sneezing, and not coming back?" "It doesn't Sound right? Purbright regarded the darkening square for a moment, hands clasped behind his back. That, Sergeant, is the difficulty with appearances. They can be more carefully arranged than fact. The morning gave way to a day of intense whispering across the town. At the bakery, the missing sister was described as the pretty one and said to have looked far too young for all that praying. At the post office, it was alleged she had been carrying a handbag, something no nun in Flaxborough had been known to do. By the time the afternoon omnibus reached the terminus, the driver was assuring passengers that the missing woman had been seen getting into a black car on the high street just after midnight. Nobody could quite say who the driver was, though. Someone suggested a foreign-looking gentleman, which was quite enough to send Mrs. Brackley into delighted spasms of foreboding. At police headquarters, the duty constable was kept busy answering telephone calls from townsfolk who claimed to have seen the nun earlier that day in shops, on bicycles, and once even in the snug of the Black Swan pub. The cumulative effect was less to clarify the mystery than to expand it until it seemed as if half a dozen nuns had vanished simultaneously in different corners of town. Purbright, however, kept his counsel. He paid a visit in the late afternoon to St. Winifred's Convent, a grim Victorian pile half smothered in ivy at the edge of town. The Mother Superior, a pale, tight-lipped woman with the expression of one who considered levity a venial sin, received him in a chilly parlour. "Yes, Inspector, we did attend midnight mass," she admitted, her voice thin and precise. "6 of us all returned safely here afterwards. None is missing." Purbright inclined his head. "I see. Forgive me, Reverend Mother, but there seems to be a persistent impression that one sister did not leave the church with the others." "That is nonsense," said the Superior, though a faint twitch about her mouth suggested the word carried an unwelcome edge of anxiety. "We were all present at supper this morning. Not one is absent. People in this town gossip." "They do?" said Purbright gravely. "May I ask, have any of your sisters worn red shoes?" The Superior's eyes widened with indignation. "Certainly not. What an impertinent suggestion. Sisters wear sandals or black shoes according to regulation. Red shoes? Why, it is unthinkable." "Then I must be mistaken," Purbright murmured, rising. As he and Love departed the convent, the sergeant whispered, "But she was lying, wasn't she, sir? You saw the look on her face. She knows something." Purbright gave a small, non-committal nod. "She knows something. But we cannot be certain what. There are many things people in respectable institutions prefer not to confess to the police." That evening, as the bells tolled across the town for evensong, gossip had already reached its second stage. It was no longer a question of whether a nun had vanished, but what shameful story was being concealed to explain it. By 9 o'clock, the Black Swan was humming with speculation. Some swore the missing woman had been an impostor planted among the sisters for some dark purpose. Others insisted she was a runaway novice who had slipped out to meet a lover in secret. A retired clerk proposed that she was a criminal in disguise, hiding from the law. Each tale gained strength in proportion to the teller's thirst. Meanwhile, Purbright sat at his desk, gazing at the single sheet of paper on which Sergeant Love had compiled the facts. It contained little more than Mrs. Babbitt's insistence on red shoes, half a dozen contradictory sightings, and the convent's assurance that none of their sisters was absent. He was still staring at it when the telephone rang. Love, picking up, listened with eyes widening. He handed the receiver to his superior. "For you, sir. It's Constable Hodge. He says they've found something by the river." Purbright took the call, listened, and replaced the receiver without haste. Then he turned to Love. "A shoe," he said softly. "A red one, stuck in the mud by the weir." And with that, the mystery ceased to be mere gossip and became something far more tangible. The river at Flaxborough was not grand enough to command respect, nor small enough to be dismissed. It was the kind of sluggish waterway that collected oddments, branches, bicycle frames, once even a stuffed armchair, until its banks resembled the storage yard of some inattentive junk dealer. On this particular morning, mist curled low over the weir, and the only sound was the steady rush of water spilling into the foaming basin below. Constable Hodge, who had drawn the unenviable duty of patrol near the river, stood stiffly on the bank, his nose pink with cold. He pointed unnecessarily at the bright object half buried in mud. "There, sir, just where I said. Can't mistake it." Purbright studied the single red shoe. It had been caught in the reeds, the leather glistening. Wet, but otherwise intact. A sensible sort of heel, sturdy enough for walking, but undeniably feminine. He stooped, examined the sole, and tapped it lightly with one gloved finger. "Not a cheap article," he remarked. Love, eager to be useful, asked, "So do we assume the missing nun, if she was a nun, came this way, sir?" "Perhaps. Though shoes have a way of travelling independently of their owners, Sergeant." The shoe was retrieved, carefully wrapped, and sent back to the station for safekeeping. By then the rumour mill had already accelerated beyond police control. A fisherman who had been lurking nearby took the discovery as license to declare, by tea-time, that the nun's body was seen floating past the mill's sluice. By evening this had swollen into the conviction that 2 bodies had been recovered, one of them headless, though no one could say whose. Purbright, knowing well the futility of trying to chase down every false tale, concentrated instead on establishing where the red-shoed figure had been seen before the service. This brought him, with Sergeant Love in tow, to the doorstep of Mrs. Brackley, who lived above the greengrocer's. She opened the door, wearing an apron patterned with cabbage leaves and a look of delighted self-importance. "Yes, Inspector, I did notice her," she said, once comfortably seated with her hands folded in her lap as though prepared to dictate her memoirs. "That one with the little nose and the red shoes. She came out of the church porch just before the service, and she asked me if there was anywhere she might buy cough lozenges. I said, 'Not at this hour, my dear, you'll have to wait till morning.'" And she gave a little laugh, not nun-like at all. Too light-hearted, if you take my meaning. Purbright inclined his head. "And did she say where she had come from?" "Not a word. But she did ask how far it was to the railway station. I thought it curious. Why would a nun want to know that on Christmas Eve?" Love's pencil scratched furiously. "Did she speak with an accent, madam?" Mrs. Brackley pursed her lips. "Not foreign, if that's what you mean, but not local either. Refined, perhaps, like someone who had been to a ladies' finishing school." "Thank you," said Purbright, rising. "You have been most helpful." Back in the street, Love frowned. "So, sir, she was asking about the railway station before the service. That doesn't fit with the convent saying all 6 returned there together." "It doesn't fit at all, Sergeant, which is why I prefer it to the convent's version." The following morning, Purbright called again at St. Winifred's. The Mother Superior received him with a look suggesting that the mere existence of the police constituted a spiritual inconvenience. "I have nothing further to add, Inspector," she said, her fingers tapping an armrest like rosary beads struck against impatience. "All our sisters are present and accounted for. You are pursuing a phantom." "Then perhaps the phantom was wearing your habit," Purbright replied mildly. The Superior's eyes sharpened. "That would be blasphemous." "Or merely inconvenient," said Purbright. "Might I trouble you to provide me with the names of the 6 sisters who attended midnight mass?" Her hesitation, though brief, was noticeable. She recited them, each name pronounced as though engraved on brass: Sister Gertrude, Sister Euphemia, Sister Agnes, Sister Margaret, Sister Bernadette, Sister Clotilde. All present, all loyal, all obedient. Love, once they were outside, muttered, "I'll wager, sir, one of them wasn't there at all." Or, Purbright corrected gently, someone was there who should not have been. As the day wore on, the someone began to acquire a shadowy identity in town gossip. A runaway maid, suggested one informant. An actress in hiding, claimed another. Mrs. Babbitt, not content with her earlier triumph, now advanced the theory that the impostor was none other than the niece of Councillor Hopcroft, who had been seen in suspicious company on the London train weeks earlier. Purbright let these theories ferment unattended. He preferred instead to examine the practical matter of how a woman in nun's clothing wearing bright red shoes had managed to appear and then vanish under so many eyes. The red shoes themselves, once cleaned and inspected, yielded no immediate clue beyond a manufacturer's stamp inside the lining, an upscale London shoemaker whose clientele was unlikely to include convent sisters. The inspector sent a discreet inquiry, but doubted much would return quickly. That night, unable to sleep, Purbright found himself turning over the oddity of the cough lozenges. Why would the impostor ask for them? Nervousness, perhaps, a way to break conversation casually? Or was it deliberate, an effort to draw attention, to plant the memory of her presence where it might be repeated later? The next morning, a small development shifted the course of enquiry. The station master at Flaxborough called the police to report that on Christmas Eve afternoon, a young woman in dark clothing had left a suitcase at the left luggage office. She had not returned for it. Purbright and Love went at once. The suitcase, a modest brown affair with worn corners, was labelled only with the initials M.H. Inside, neatly folded, were garments that could hardly be mistaken for convent issue. 2 stylish dresses, a fur-collared coat, a vanity case with cosmetics and, most telling, a small envelope containing a return ticket from London to Flaxborough. Love looked at the items with excitement. "So she wasn't a nun at all, sir. She came up from London, disguised herself, and then disappeared. That's it." "Not quite it, Sergeant," Purbright said softly. "We must still ask why she wished to appear as a nun at midnight mass in Flaxborough. She could have vanished far more conveniently in London." Love frowned, baffled. "But who is she?" Purbright tapped the envelope. "M.H., whoever she is, those are her initials, and she intended to go back to London. Something, or someone, prevented that. When word of the suitcase inevitably leaked, Flaxborough's gossiping classes redoubled their efforts. Mrs. Brackley swore she had always suspected the woman was a London sort. The landlord of the Black Swan declared that she had drunk a gin and tonic at his bar a week before, though he admitted he couldn't be absolutely certain she had been wearing a wimple at the time. By evening, the town had christened her the Scarlet Sister. But amid all the chatter, one detail returned insistently to Purbright's mind: the cough, the faint, delicate sneeze Mrs. Babbitt had mentioned. It was too human, too personal, for the ghostly impostor people were inventing. He began to wonder whether someone in Flaxborough already knew M.H., whether her masquerade was meant less for concealment than for some kind of signal. The answer, or at least the next clue, came 2 nights later. A boy delivering newspapers to the houses along King Street reported to his mother, who at once reported to the police, that he had seen a figure in black by the old almshouses after dusk. The boy was certain it was a nun. When the constable hurried there, he found nothing. Nothing, that is, but a second shoe, red, gleaming faintly under the lamplight, placed with unsettling neatness on the steps of the almshouse chapel. The impression was of someone not discarding evidence, but laying a trail. The second red shoe, discovered on the steps of the almshouse chapel, brought with it a ripple of unease that even the most gossip-hardened residents of Flaxborough could not ignore. It was laid with a peculiar precision, heel angled toward the door, as if pointing inward, a silent but deliberate message. By the time Purbright arrived with Sergeant Love, a small crowd had gathered, drawn more by curiosity than concern. Their breath fogged in the crisp air as they speculated, some half-seriously suggesting spirits, others insisting on a criminal plot of the most audacious variety. Purbright regarded the scene without comment, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes narrowing slightly at the arrangement of the shoe. Love, ever eager to leap to conclusions, leaned over and whispered, "It's like she wants to be found, sir, or is mocking us." "Or someone wants us to believe that," Purbright murmured, crouching to inspect the shoe more closely. "Note how it is clean, Sergeant, not muddied as the first. Someone has placed it carefully. There is deliberation here." "Who would do that?" Love asked. "That," Purbright said, standing, "is what we must find out. But the method suggests a mind attentive to perception, aware of the effect of small gestures. It is not a brute act, it is a performance." The crowd murmured and shuffled. One elderly man, leaning on a cane, ventured, "Might be the young lady herself trying to frighten folks. You hear of stranger tricks in London?" Purbright inclined his head. "Possibly. Or someone acting on her behalf, or against her. That too is possible." He directed Love to take statements from the bystanders while he inspected the surrounding area. Nothing was disturbed. The doors were locked, the windows secure. There were no footprints in the frost leading away from the steps, only the solitary impression of the shoe. Back at headquarters, Purbright spread both red shoes on his desk, examining them side by side. The first, found by the river, was mud-streaked, as though carried or dropped in haste. The second, on the almshouse steps, was immaculate, pristine in contrast. This distinction troubled him more than it should have, for it suggested two separate incidents, or two separate minds at work. Love, hovering, said, "It's almost like she's sending us a message, sir. Two shoes in two places, but why?" "Consider," Purbright said softly, "the possibility that she is being guided by someone else entirely, and the message may not be to us, but to another person entirely." By mid-afternoon, Purbright called upon Mrs. Brackley again. The greengrocer's wife received him with her habitual combination of curiosity and judgment. "I understand you found a second shoe, Inspector," she said, shaking her head. "Terribly exciting for such a quiet town." "Yes, Mrs. Brackley, and I wonder if you noticed anything unusual about the figure you saw on the way to midnight mass." "Oh, the red shoes?" She nodded vigorously. "Yes, I remember now. There was something else, too. She had a small leather case, something like a book, perhaps. She kept it pressed against her chest. And she sneezed, not once, but twice. Very delicately, if you take my meaning." Purbright made a small note in his mind. "And no one else would have been present at that moment?" No, I was the only one near the porch." "But you must understand, Inspector." She looked nervous, very nervous. "Thank you," Purbright said. "That may be quite important." He returned to the station, pondering the significance of nervousness in someone trained, or pretending to be trained, to move discreetly. A genuine sister would have carried herself with calm and assurance. An impostor would reveal cracks in posture, in expression, in minor habits like sneezing. As evening drew in, he walked through the frost-bitten streets of Flaxborough, past shop windows reflecting pale candlelight. His thoughts drifted to the first red shoe by the river. The river's edge was remote, slightly off the beaten path. Someone could easily have discarded or lost a shoe there without notice. Yet the second shoe, placed with care, indicated intent, the desire to be observed. 2 incidents, one hurried, one deliberate. The next morning, the station received a curious note delivered by a local boy who had been sent to the wrong address initially. It was typed, a matter-of-fact style, unsigned, containing only the sentence, "The one you seek wears her intentions like her shoes." Love read it aloud, turning pale. "What on earth does that mean, sir?" Purbright considered it silently. The message was both taunt and clue. Whoever had written it had knowledge of the red shoes and the disappearance, perhaps even of the suitcase and the visit to the railway. It was personal, carefully phrased, a small smile hidden in the words. By mid-morning, Purbright had visited the local railway station to check the records of departures and arrivals from the previous evening. The left luggage ticket matched a luggage tag as expected, but the surveillance at the station, a series of stations really, in the eyes of Flaxborough's sleepy clerks, revealed a fleeting figure, a woman in dark clothing, moving with unusual speed, carrying a small case. No hat or wimple, no disguise except for the cloak. "What strikes me, Sergeant," said Purbright, "is that she moves like someone accustomed to being watched." Love frowned. "So she's clever, sir, clever enough to pull this off?" "Not clever enough, perhaps," Purbright replied. "Otherwise we would not have these traces left behind. Cleverness often reveals itself in the very attempt to appear inconspicuous." Meanwhile, in town, the gossip had reached fever pitch. The Scarlet Sister had become a fixture of speculation. Children whispered about her in school corridors. Shopkeepers told exaggerated versions of her exploits. Mrs. Babbitt sent daily reports to everyone she knew, insisting that she had accurately predicted each new development. At the convent, tension was palpable. Sisters spoke in whispers, exchanging glances over their prayer books. Sister Euphemia, who had been particularly startled by the sneeze and the red shoes, suggested to the superior that perhaps an outsider had attempted a prank. The superior, however, considered the matter beneath her attention and warned against further conjecture. Purbright, contemplating the human element in this mystery, realized the importance of timing and observation. Red shoes, delicate sneezes, questions about cough lozenges, all hinted at a woman who wished to be noticed, yet carefully obscured her identity. This was no ordinary flight. This was an intricate performance, staged with foresight. The final clue for the day came unexpectedly. A postman reported a small parcel, misdelivered but subsequently recovered, addressed to no one in particular, but marked for observation. Inside was a diary of sorts, a notebook filled with entries detailing the convent, the midnight mass, and the days immediately before and after. The handwriting was careful, precise, and clearly not of a nun. Love's eyes were wide. "So we've found her, sir. This must belong to her." "Not quite, Sergeant. It belongs to the woman who wishes to control the narrative, whoever she is. She may be nearby, watching, perhaps even amused, that we have discovered this." Purbright leaned back, steepling his fingers. "The evidence is accumulating in layers. Each layer is a small performance, a message designed to mislead and to reveal at once. Whoever orchestrated this is thinking several moves ahead." By the end of the day, Purbright had one certainty. Flaxborough had witnessed a crime, though not of a traditional nature, executed with such subtlety that the town itself had become complicit, turning curiosity into misinformation. And most troubling of all, The woman in red shoes was still at large, her intentions inscrutable, her next move unpredictable. As night fell, Purbright returned to his desk, the diary opened before him. The words were clear, precise, yet the identity of the writer remained a mystery. He paused over one passage describing the midnight mass. "I am unseen, yet observed. I walk among them, cloaked in the ordinary, yet they notice." They must notice, Bright set the diary down, noting the deliberate care in phrasing. Whoever this woman was, she thrived on attention, on the theatre of her disappearance, and that theatre, he knew, was far from over. Outside, Flaxborough slept under the pale glow of a winter moon, unaware that their most peculiar Christmas had only just begun. The following morning, Flaxborough awoke to a frost-hardened street with shopkeepers sweeping sidewalks and the usual clatter of milk bottles on doorsteps. Yet beneath the daily rhythms there lingered a peculiar tension, as though the town collectively held its breath. Word of the second shoe and the recovered diary had spread like candlelight in dry tinder. Whispers turned into speculation, and speculation into confident certainty, or, at least, as close to certainty as the townsfolk could muster. Purbright arrived at headquarters early, finding Sergeant Love examining the diary once again, with a furrowed brow. "Sir," Love said, "I've gone through these entries. She describes everything in such detail, the convent, the midnight mass, even Mrs. Brackley's cabbage-patterned apron. It's almost as if she wants us to notice, wants us to be intrigued." "Precisely, Sergeant," Purbright murmured, pouring himself a cup of lukewarm tea. "Each observation is a breadcrumb, and yet the bread has been baked to appear accidental. There is a deliberate play here, a subtle manipulation of perception. The woman enjoys being watched, yet remains concealed." "It is a delicate balancing act," Love shook his head, incredulous. "It makes my head spin, sir." "Why go to all this trouble? Why come here at all?" Purbright said nothing immediately. He rose and walked to the window, observing the square below. Children skated on patches of ice, mothers carried parcels, and the occasional passerby stared. Up at the station, vaguely conscious of the police presence. "To move with intent," he said at last, "is to draw attention while controlling the narrative. She is neither fool nor amateur. She has a purpose, and that purpose is bound up in what the town sees, hears, and repeats." By mid-morning, the inspector had arranged visits to several locations where sightings had been reported. The first stop was the railway station, where the young woman had left her suitcase. The station master confirmed the previous day's report. A woman matching the Scarlet Sisters' description had arrived from London, deposited luggage, and purchased a ticket, but she had not claimed the ticket, nor had she boarded any train. "Did she speak to anyone, sir?" Love asked the station master. "Yes, briefly," said the man. "She asked for directions to the High Street. Seemed in a bit of a hurry. Polite, though, very composed. You know the type." "Composed, but nervous," Purbright corrected softly. "Composition can hide anxiety, Sergeant. Anxiety leaves traces, however subtle." They proceeded to the greengrocer's, where Mrs. Brackley added a minor, yet potentially telling, detail. "I remember something else," she said, dabbing at her apron. "She asked about cough lozenges, yes, but also if the church porch would be warm. I thought it odd. Most young ladies expect discomfort when attending midnight mass in December." Purbright nodded. The combination of small, precise inquiries, the lozenges, the temperature of the porch, suggested not mere curiosity, but careful observation. Someone who wanted to blend in while taking stock of her surroundings. In the afternoon, they visited the river where the first shoe had been found. The reeds and mud, when inspected carefully, revealed only faint traces of footwear, none conclusively linking to the woman. Yet Purbright noted the direction of travel implied by the position of the shoe, toward the almshouse rather than back into town. The placement suggested intention. She had either retraced steps or someone else had positioned it deliberately to mislead. Returning to headquarters, Purbright reviewed the diary once again. One passage struck him, a note about the nuns themselves, describing in minute detail their behavior during the service, the folding of hands, the tilt of heads, the pattern of glances. The attention to detail was meticulous, yet phrased to appear incidental, as if the writer had merely been a casual observer. "It's surveillance," Purbright said finally, turning to Love. "Not of the police, nor of the townsfolk, but of the sisters. She is learning their habits, cataloguing responses, perhaps to predict reactions, and yet she cannot openly enter the convent, hence the disguise, hence the performance at midnight mass." Love leaned back, rubbing his temples. "So she's planning something, sir, or just studying them?" "Possibly both," Purbright replied. "The diary gives insight into her mind. She is strategic, careful, yet she craves the validation of notice, hence the red shoes, the cough, the meticulously placed evidence, each an act of controlled exposure." By evening, another development had arrived. The local schoolmistress, Mrs. Fenwick, had discovered a scrap of paper fluttering near the chapel gates. On it was written in a neat hand, "Observe the ordinary closely. It will reveal the extraordinary." Purbright examined the note, turning it over between fingers. It was consistent with the tone of the diary, the deliberate yet playful taunt of someone confident in their control over perception. The handwriting, precise and measured, suggested a person used to crafting careful messages. "What's troubling," Purbright said, "is that each clue is designed to provoke attention, but not to give identity. She is hiding in plain sight. Sergeant, every act is calculated. This is no rash escapee or runaway. This is an orchestrated exercise in observation and misdirection." Love looked puzzled. "So how do we catch her, sir? She's everywhere and nowhere." "By noticing what she cannot hide," Purbright said softly. "Small contradictions, habits, mannerisms, things overlooked in her attention to detail. People skilled at concealment are often betrayed by trivialities." That night, as Purbright returned to his home, he reflected on the pattern forming. Red shoes carefully chosen, precise observations of ordinary life, messages placed to be discovered, timing of appearances, strategic visits to key locations, all pointed toward a deliberate design, executed with the care of someone highly intelligent and highly observant. Yet it was the human element, the subtle imperfections, that intrigued him most. A sneeze, a fleeting hesitation, a question asked and answered to precisely, these were the small cracks through which truth might seep. Meanwhile, the town buzzed with its own interpretations. At the Black Swan, landlords and patrons speculated about motives, creating narratives that ranged from romantic escapades to criminal schemes. Children, emboldened by the rumor, whispered about the Scarlet Sisters' nocturnal wanderings. Mrs. Babbitt, unable to resist, sent letters to distant cousins, warning them of the mysterious figure in Flaxborough. Purbright, unmoved by the noise, focused on establishing tangible leads. He arranged to interview several townsfolk who had claimed sightings, a baker, a taxi driver, a florist, each providing snippets of information, sometimes contradictory, yet all contributing to a composite understanding. The most significant account came from the florist, a Mrs. Lenton who noted a peculiar habit. The woman, even in disguise, had repeatedly checked reflections in shop windows, adjusting the drape of her cloak, smoothing the wimple of the nun's habit. "That's very telling," Purbright said. She is conscious of presentation, Sergeant. She wishes to be perceived, but only on her terms. Confidence masquerading as anxiety, a subtle control over observation. Love nodded, impressed, yet overwhelmed. I never thought shoes and sneezes could be such important clues, sir. They are, Purbright said, because they reveal human nature in its unguarded moments. All the performance in the world cannot hide the habits we unconsciously display, and she has left traces of those habits all over this town. By the end of the day, Purbright had pieced together a pattern. The arrival from London, the masquerade at midnight mass, the careful disposal and placement of the red shoes, the diary, the notes, and the scattered observations. It suggested planning, intelligence, and a desire to influence perception. Yet in true Flaxborough fashion, no one could see the underlying motive. Was it mischief? A private vendetta? A test of the town's gullibility? Purbright suspected it was more personal than public, a matter of hidden acquaintance or subtle revenge. As darkness fell, he returned to the diary once more, pausing over a final entry. They watch, they speculate, they whisper. But the truth walks quietly in plain sight. Purbright leaned back, a faint smile touching his lips. The woman's audacity and cleverness were undeniable. Yet, as always, it was the small, overlooked details that would betray her. He only needed patience. Outside, Flaxborough slept, the snow beginning to fall in gentle flakes. The red shoes, so carefully displayed and scattered, were now a symbol of something more than curiosity, a challenge, a riddle. And somewhere, perhaps nearby, the Scarlet Sister watched, confident that her story was unfolding exactly as intended. Next morning, the snow that had begun falling the night before lay in a crisp, white blanket over Flaxborough, softening its streets and muffling its usual clamour. Shopkeepers scraped icy slush from doorways, children skated in the squares, and the occasional cyclist braved the slick roads with tentative care. Yet beneath the picturesque stillness, a quiet tension lingered, the sort that always follows a disruption in small-town life. The disappearance of the Scarlet Sister had transformed the ordinary rhythms into a subtle theatre of observation, and Purbright intended to explore it thoroughly. He began his day at the Black Swan, where gossip was always most concentrated. The landlord, Mr. Clements, was sweeping near the bar, pausing periodically to comment on passing patrons. "I tell you, Inspector," he said, bowing slightly as Purbright entered, "there's something about that woman. You can feel it in the air. The way people look around wondering if she's still there, even when she isn't. And the shoes, oh, the red shoes, I've never seen the like." "Yes, Mr. Clements," Purbright said mildly. "People do tend to remember distinctive footwear. Distinctive doesn't cover it, sir. They glint in the light, catch the eye, make you notice, and that's just the beginning." Purbright nodded, not for affirmation, but in quiet acknowledgement of the landlord's perceptive eye. He had learned long ago that in Flaxborough it was often the casual observer, someone untrained in formal investigation, who noticed the details that eluded more methodical searches. After speaking with Mr. Clements, Purbright visited the station to review railway records in greater depth. The young woman's arrival from London had been noted, but her departure remained unconfirmed. Yet the ticket, bearing the initials M.H., suggested premeditation, a planned arrival without intention of immediate return. The question now was what she intended to do during her time in Flaxborough, and how her movements intertwined with the convent and the town's ordinary patterns. At noon, Purbright returned to the convent, this time with a request to speak with Sister Euphemia. The younger nun, still unsettled by the events at midnight mass, led him through the echoing corridors to a small parlour where light fell in pale shafts through frost-frosted windows. "Inspector, I'm afraid I do not understand why you continue to question us," Sister Euphemia said, her hands clasped in front of her habit. "All of us are present and accounted for." "I do not see why anyone should have cause to disguise herself in our attire." "I am aware, sister," Purbright replied quietly. "Yet appearances, especially in Flaxborough, can be deceptive, and someone clearly wished to present herself as one of you, if only briefly." Sister Euphemia frowned, then lowered her voice. "I am not certain, but I thought I saw someone near the vestry steps glancing at the choir stalls. She, or he, was very careful to avoid being seen, but I may be mistaken." "Not necessarily," Purbright said. "Observation is often, rewarded by accuracy, even when unintentional." "Thank you, sister." The conversation left him pondering the pattern of the Scarlet Sisters' appearances. Each sighting, each placed object, and even the brief interactions at the station and the porch suggested not haste, but deliberate pacing. She was creating a narrative for the town, orchestrating attention with precision, and testing the responses of those around her. By afternoon, Purbright arranged to speak with several townsfolk who had reported sightings. One, a florist named Mrs. Lenton, recounted seeing a dark figure lingering near the market cross, adjusting a cloak and examining reflections in shop windows. Another, a baker, swore he had observed someone slipping between buildings, moving with the agility of a practiced observer. The composite image formed by these accounts was precise, a small, purposeful figure, meticulous in movements, confident yet guarded. Back at headquarters, Purbright studied the red shoes again. The contrast between the river-discarded shoe and the deliberately placed one at the almshouse still intrigued him. One was hurried, perhaps lost in the river's reeds, the other carefully positioned for notice. This duality suggested not one, but possibly two phases in her plan: initial escape or misdirection, followed by controlled visibility. "Sergeant," Purbright said, breaking the silence, "notice how one shoe carries the appearance of accident, while the other conveys intent. That is not coincidence. There is strategy in these placements, and strategy implies motive." Love nodded, though his brow remained furrowed. "I suppose, sir, the question is why she would go to so much trouble for us to notice, yet reveal nothing. What does she gain from all this?" Purbright sipped his tea, considering. "Attention can be a tool, Sergeant. Not vanity exactly, but control. She is orchestrating observation, guiding it, shaping it. We are unwitting participants in her design. The question is, toward what end?" As evening approached, a small commotion was reported at the riverside path near the old mill. A young boy delivering papers had found a folded piece of paper stuck between two stones on the path. It read simply, "I am closer than you think. Observe and learn." Purbright examined it carefully. The handwriting matched the diary entries, neat, measured, deliberate. He handed it to Love. "Notice," he said, "how she continues to speak in riddles, yet each is grounded in physical reality. She places clues to draw attention while keeping herself invisible. It is an exercise in perception as much as concealment." By nightfall, Purbright's mind was engaged in quiet reflection. Each incident, the red shoes, the diary, the notes, the observations, pointed to intelligence and planning. Yet the key remained elusive: identity. MH, the initials, were a tantalizing but uninformative fragment. The woman's familiarity with Flaxborough's routines, her ability to move unnoticed in a town so small, and her knowledge of human behavior suggested prior acquaintance or research. Purbright considered the townsfolk in turn: Mrs. Babbitt, ever watchful, perhaps unwittingly complicit in providing observation; the florist, whose reflection she seemed to study; the convent, whose routines were carefully catalogued. All were actors in her performance, yet none could reveal her identity. Later that night, as he reviewed the diary and notes again, a pattern began to emerge. The woman's movements were not random. Each appearance, each discarded or placed object was linked to a specific audience: the convent, the town gossip, the police. She had studied who would notice what and when, crafting a network of information. That played upon Flaxborough's natural curiosity. Purbright leaned back in his chair, pondering the subtle artistry of the mystery. The Scarlet Sister was clever, undeniably so, but cleverness alone could not protect from observation if one knew where to look. It was the minutiae, the sneezes, the hesitant glances, the controlled adjustments of the cloak that revealed intent and identity. Meanwhile, Flaxborough buzzed in anticipation. At the Black Swan, speculation ran rampant, with patrons inventing increasingly elaborate tales about the Scarlet Sister's motives. Mrs. Babbitt had sent a second round of letters to distant relations, predicting new developments and children, whispered rumours in corridors and playgrounds. The town had become an accomplice in her carefully staged drama, unknowingly reinforcing the narrative she wished to project. Purbright, however, focused on the concrete evidence: the red shoes, the diary, the railway ticket, and the small notes left deliberately to be found. Each was a piece of a puzzle that, when assembled, would point to a method, a motive, and eventually a face. Patience, he reminded himself, was crucial. The Scarlet Sister's next move was predictable only in that she wished to be noticed without being apprehended. By midnight, he had formulated a plan to test her intentions, a subtle maneuver designed to provoke a reaction that might reveal more than she intended. It would require restraint, precision, and observation, qualities he possessed in abundance. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and unrelenting. Flaxborough slept under the hush of winter, its streets gleaming white, its inhabitants dreaming of ordinary lives. Yet the Scarlet Sister, whoever she was, remained at large, orchestrating her drama, leaving traces for the observant, daring, the unsuspecting, and shaping the narrative of a small town in quiet, deliberate strokes. In the silent hours, Purbright finally allowed himself a faint smile. The game was far from over, but the pieces were aligning. And in the careful observation of human nature, in the minutiae of shoes, sneezes, and subtle gestures, he knew the truth waited patiently to be uncovered. The morning after the snow had settled, Flaxborough's streets bore a deceptive serenity. The icy glaze on the cobblestones reflected the pale winter sun, creating a mirage of calm that belied the tension simmering beneath the town's polite exterior. Residents moved about with careful steps, conscious of the fragile crust beneath their feet, but also mindful of the invisible presence that had unsettled their ordinary rhythms, the Scarlet Sister, whose escapades had now become the subject of whispered speculation in every shop, schoolroom, and parlour. Purbright arrived at headquarters early, greeted by the sight of Sergeant Love pacing in front of the map pinned to the wall. Red dots marked sightings, notes indicated discarded objects, and various lines suggested probable routes. Love, a man of action rather than contemplation, wore a look of barely contained exasperation. "Sir, I've been through all the reports again," he said. "It's like she's everywhere at once. Red shoes, diary, notes. She's treating the town like a stage, and we're all actors in her performance." Purbright nodded slowly, eyes on the map. "Yes, Sergeant, and what makes it particularly challenging is her subtlety. Each trace she leaves is meant to be seen, yet reveals nothing of her identity. There is a purpose in every act, but the purpose is layered, obscured by her careful design. Love tapped a finger on the map. And now we've got a third clue, sir. Another note, this time found near the river bridge. Someone reported it fluttering against a lamppost. It says, "Observe the ordinary. The extraordinary hides within." Purbright took the note, reading the familiar, precise handwriting. "She thrives on attention," he murmured, "but she controls it with discipline. This is not mischief, it is strategy." By mid-morning, Purbright decided it was time to expand the field of inquiry. The Scarlet Sister had made her presence known in multiple quarters: the convent, the river, the station, the almshouses. Now he needed to establish who else might intersect with her plan, townsfolk whose routines could either conceal or reveal her movements. The first visit was to Mrs. Lenton, the florist, who had noted the woman's habit of checking reflections in shop windows. Her meticulous record-keeping of local sights was invaluable. "Yes, Inspector, I saw her again," Mrs. Lenton said, brushing soil from her hands as she arranged chrysanthemums. She lingered near the market cross, adjusting her cloak, peering at herself in the glass. She seemed attentive, almost calculating. Purbright inclined his head. "And did anyone else observe her?" Mrs. Lenton shook her head. "Not that I am aware of, but she left a sense of presence, you understand? Something about her made you aware she was there even when she wasn't moving." "Precisely," Purbright said softly, noting the subtle distinction between visibility and impact. "She wants to be observed, but on her own terms, and the very care with which she presents herself may reveal more than she intends." From there, Purbright visited the railway station once more, scrutinizing the travel records for any discrepancies. The woman, M.H., had arrived from London, left luggage, and purchased a ticket, but never departed. The timing suggested she had intended to appear in Flaxborough deliberately, orchestrating her introduction to the town's routines. The left luggage, the red shoes, the diary, all were elements of a carefully staged sequence. By afternoon, he proceeded to the almshouses, where the second red shoe had been placed on the steps. Hodge and a constable had cordoned the area, but the snow made footprints difficult to discern. Still, Purbright observed carefully. The positioning of the shoe was deliberate, angled with attention to the path of approach. "She wants it noticed," he said to Love, "but she also wants it interpreted incorrectly. There is misdirection in every gesture." Love scratched his head. "So she's cleverer than any of us thought, sir. But what is she really after?" Purbright paused, eyes following the line of footprints partially obscured by fresh snow. "That is what we must discover, and the key may lie in those whom she knows or trusts in this town, people who appear peripheral yet hold influence over observation or movement." It was on that basis he arranged the next series of interviews, carefully selecting residents who might have inadvertently intersected with M.H.'s design. He spoke with a baker, a grocer, the librarian, and even the postman who had delivered the cryptic notes. Each provided small details, a glimpse of a figure moving silently, a fleeting sound of a cough, the briefest appearance near a window. Nothing confirmed identity, but each contributed to a composite sense of her routine, her attentiveness, her deliberate interactions with the town's ordinary features. By evening, Purbright returned to headquarters with Love, who looked exhausted. "Sir, it's like chasing shadows," he said. "Everything is connected, but nothing leads directly to her. Shoes, notes, diary. She's always one step ahead." "That," Purbright said, "is the nature of careful observation. Those who orchestrate perception can hide in plain sight because they exploit assumptions. We see patterns, but we impose narratives on them. The truth is simpler, yet it often lies beneath the expectations we carry." As night fell, Purbright reviewed the diary once more. A recurring theme emerged: attention to habit, behavior, and response. The Scarlet Sister catalogued not just movements, but the nuances of expression, the tilt of a head, the pacing of steps, the briefest glance exchanged between townsfolk. The depth of observation suggested prior acquaintance or a meticulous study of the town's routines. Purbright made a note. The diary, combined with the strategic placement of shoes and the cryptic messages, indicated a motive beyond simple mischief. This was personal, calculated, and designed to manipulate perception while remaining untraceable. Meanwhile, the town itself continued to respond in its predictable ways. At the Black Swan, speculation ran rampant. Shopkeepers added embellishments to every sighting. Children whispered in school corridors, spreading fantastical accounts. Mrs. Babbitt, unstoppable, sent further letters predicting developments she could not possibly know. Flaxborough had become a stage, and the Scarlet Sister, its unseen director. Purbright considered the social dynamics carefully. The Scarlet Sister's actions exploited curiosity, rumor, and expectation. By leaving clues designed to provoke attention, she created a network of observation in which the townsfolk participated willingly, providing their own interpretations and embellishments. It was an exercise in subtle manipulation, the consequences of which went far beyond the initial disappearance. Late that night, Purbright walked along King Street, freshly dusted with snow, reflecting on the patterns of movement, observation, and timing. The Scarlet Sister had appeared to leave one trail after another, each carefully orchestrated, each deliberately visible, yet opaque. He noted the improbability of the coincidences: arrival from London, red shoes, diary entries, cryptic notes, meticulous placement of objects, and interactions with both convent and townsfolk. Yet despite her apparent foresight, there remained vulnerabilities, tiny cracks in the meticulous facade. Hesitations, fleeting coughs, small discrepancies in timing, slight inconsistencies in placement. These were the threads that, if followed carefully, could unravel the carefully constructed narrative. Purbright returned to headquarters and reviewed his notes, mentally arranging the information like pieces of a puzzle. He knew that the next stage of the investigation required a different approach, not merely gathering sightings or examining objects, but creating a situation in which the Scarlet Sister's attention would betray her, revealing something more concrete than shoes, notes, or diaries. As he considered the plan, Love muttered, "So, sir, we wait for her to make a mistake?" "Not precisely, Sergeant," Purbright said, eyes twinkling with quiet amusement. "We guide her to reveal what she cannot conceal while remaining invisible ourselves. The ordinary routines of this town, carefully observed, will do most of the work for us. And when she responds, the smallest gesture, the slightest slip, will tell us everything we need to know." Outside, the snow continued to fall, softening the edges of Flaxborough's streets and rooftops. The town, for all its apparent calm, remained an unwitting participant in a subtle drama. The Scarlet Sister, wherever she now hid, had set the stage with precision, manipulating observation, testing reactions, and leaving a trail of curiosity that stretched from the convent to the river and beyond. And in the quiet of his office, Purbright, patient as ever, allowed himself the satisfaction of knowing that the threads, once carefully pulled, would reveal the pattern he had long suspected. It was only a matter of careful observation, timing, and the subtle orchestration of human behavior. The game was far from over, but the pieces were beginning to align. And somewhere in the snow-covered town, the Scarlet Sister watched, confident in her performance, unaware that every carefully controlled step had already been noted by a far more patient observer. The morning broke with a brittle clarity over Flaxborough, sunlight glinting off frost-laden rooftops and glimmering on the icy cobbles. Purbright walked slowly through the market square, his hands behind his back, observing the town with that measured patience which had earned him both respect and mild exasperation from colleagues. Despite the apparent calm, the air was thick with speculation, and the townsfolk's eyes, subtle or blatant, betrayed the residual unease left by the Scarlet Sisters' nocturnal theatrics. At headquarters, Sergeant Love awaited him with a sheaf of new reports. "Sir," Love said, spreading the papers on the desk, "another incident last night. Miss Penrose, the night watchman's daughter, claims she saw someone near the chapel windows peering in. She was wearing, well, she says red shoes, but she couldn't be sure in the moonlight." Purbright leaned forward, his finger tracing the lines of the report. "Red shoes again, you say? That is consistent, Sergeant. And what else did she observe?" "She said the figure moved quietly, adjusted her cloak, and seemed to watch the congregation as they left midnight mass. She didn't approach anyone, just observed, then disappeared before anyone noticed." Purbright nodded. "So, our pattern holds strategic appearances, careful observation, and controlled interaction. The performance continues, and so does her manipulation of attention." "Sir, I still can't see the point of all this," Love muttered. "Is it mischief? Is it malice?" "Perhaps neither. Perhaps both," Purbright said softly. "Or perhaps it is something else entirely. Observation can be an end in itself, but notice this. Every action leaves traces, that is the constant. Traces reveal patterns, and patterns hint at intent." He decided it was time to expand the circle of inquiry further. The Scarlet Sisters' movements had become increasingly daring. The first red shoe at the river, the second on the almshouse steps, notes fluttering near the bridge, diary entries, and sightings across town. She had woven herself into the social fabric, exploiting both routine and curiosity. If he wished to anticipate her next act, he needed to consider not only her known movements, but also the unsuspected connections she might exploit. His first stop was the convent. The sisters were still unsettled. While the superior maintained her calm exterior, there was an undercurrent of tension among the nuns. Sister Euphemia in particular seemed distracted, her habitual precision in arranging hymnals and candles now slightly askew. "Inspector," she said, whispering as he arrived, "there has been something else." A box left at the back entrance, not large, but heavy, wrapped in plain brown paper. We did not open it. We feared it might be related to last week. Purbright's interest was piqued. "Was it left recently?" "Early morning, before the sun," Sister Euphemia replied. "No one saw who brought it." He requested it be brought to headquarters for inspection. When the parcel arrived, he carefully examined it. Inside was a small collection of ordinary objects, a pair of red mittens, a pocket mirror, and a small notebook detailing the nuns' winter routines, the order of prayers, the times for meals, even the placement of candles during services. Nothing overtly incriminating, yet everything suggested meticulous observation. "See, Sergeant," Purbright said, "she is cataloguing human behavior in detail. The mittens, the mirror, these are minor props, yet they speak to her interest in personal habits and appearance. She is building a map of ordinary life to reveal the extraordinary in it." By afternoon, he visited the almshouses again. The second shoe remained, carefully protected by the cordon, yet the snow had melted slightly, revealing small footprints partially hidden under frost. They were delicate, feminine, and precise, again consistent with earlier sightings. Purbright examined them carefully, noting the weight distribution, the direction of travel, and the subtle pauses that indicated observation rather than mere passage. "What strikes me," he said to Love, "is the meticulousness. Each step, each gesture is a controlled act. She wants to be noticed, but she wishes the notice to follow her narrative. That is the hallmark of a person who understands human nature as intimately as she understands her own movements." Meanwhile, the town continued to generate its own narrative. At the Black Swan, the landlord and patrons speculated about motives, ranging from whimsical amusement to long-standing vendettas. Children whispered rumours in school corridors, embellishing each sighting. Mrs. Babbitt sent yet another round of letters warning distant relatives about the Scarlet Sister. Every action she had taken now sparked layers of interpretation, each more elaborate than the last. Purbright considered the social dynamics. The Scarlet Sister's artistry was in manipulation, not malice. She had transformed Flaxborough into a stage, the residents unwitting actors, and the town's curiosity became her instrument. Each report of a sighting, each discovery of a note or shoe strengthened her control over perception. By evening, Purbright had arranged a subtle test designed to provoke a response. He prepared a display in the town square, a simple arrangement of red shoes, mittens, and small notes, each carefully placed as though forgotten. It was not an accusation nor a trap, but an invitation, a stage set for observation. He positioned Love nearby, out of sight, and waited. The snow deepened, the streets quieted, and the ordinary rhythms of Flaxborough provided a perfect cover for his experiment. Just before dusk, a shadow moved among the rooftops and alleyways, slipping from window reflection to window reflection. A woman, small and precise in her movements, adjusted her cloak, glanced at the display, and paused. For a moment, she seemed to hesitate, studying the arrangement with care. Purbright, observing from a distance, noted the briefest of gestures, a hand raised to smooth hair, a tilt of the head, the measured pacing of steps. Each subtle action revealed familiarity, recognition, and, most importantly, interest. "She cannot help herself," Purbright whispered. "Her attention is drawn to what she seeks to control, and in doing so, she reveals more than she intends." Woman stepped closer to the display, examining the shoes and notes, adjusting a small item with a delicate touch before stepping back and vanishing into the shadows. Love, watching from his concealed position, whispered, "Sir, she's here. She's seeing it all, but she hasn't noticed us." "Precisely," Purbright said softly, "and that is the key. She is confident in her control, yet unaware of the full field of observation. That small moment, that tiny gesture, tells us more than all the previous clues combined. The Scarlet Sister's intent is visible, her presence marked, but her identity remains masked. For now. As the night deepened, Purbright reviewed the day's events in his mind. The footprints, the discarded mittens, the diary, the notes, the red shoes, and now her cautious interaction with the stage display all contributed to an emerging picture. Each action was calculated, deliberate, and revealing. Yet while he had a sense of her habits and priorities, the ultimate motive and identity remained obscured, hidden beneath the careful orchestration of ordinary life. Flaxborough, silent under a blanket of fresh snow, continued to dream of normality. The Scarlet Sister, unseen, moved among them, her performance ongoing, her motives inscrutable, confident that the town's curiosity would never reach beyond the surface she had so carefully crafted. Purbright returned to headquarters, seated at his desk, and allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. Each day's events brought him closer to understanding her methods, and he had begun to sense the rhythm of her actions. Patience, observation, and subtle provocation would eventually unravel the deliberate facade. The threads were present. The pattern only required careful attention to reveal itself. And so, with the town asleep and the snow falling steadily, Purbright prepared for the next stage, aware that the Scarlet Sisters' carefully controlled world was about to be tested by someone equally patient, observant, and unflappable. The game had evolved, and the pieces were now set for the quiet confrontation that would determine how the intricate drama of Flaxborough would unfold. The next morning, Flaxborough awoke beneath a pale, overcast sky. The previous night's snow had melted slightly, leaving streets damp and reflective, the kind of grey light that lent the town an air of muted tension. Purbright moved deliberately through the market square, observing the residents with his usual patience, noting small gestures, glances, and deviations from habitual routines. The Scarlet Sisters' influence remained palpable, not in overt chaos, but in the way ordinary activities now carried a subtle wariness, a hint of anticipation. At headquarters, Sergeant Love awaited him, frowning over a collection of reports and notes. "Sir," he said, "we've had a flurry of new observations overnight. People swear they saw a figure near the chapel, but descriptions conflict. Some say tall, others say short. Some insist on red shoes, others only the cloak. It's maddening." Purbright gave a faint smile. "Precisely, Sergeant. She thrives on ambiguity. She creates a pattern only in part, leaving the remainder to speculation. The contradictions are deliberate. The uncertainty is her tool." Love rubbed his temples. "So what do we do, sir? How do we pin her down if we can't even agree on her appearance?" "We do what she cannot. Observe without being observed," Purbright replied. "And we orchestrate a situation in which she cannot help but reveal more than she intends. Observation can become exposure if carefully applied." By late morning, Purbright visited the convent again, accompanied by a local constable. Sister Euphemia, still unsettled, guided them through the corridors. "Inspector," she said quietly, "we have taken care not to mention anything further to anyone, yet I feel there is a presence. She watches even when unseen. I cannot explain it." "That is perceptive, sister," Purbright said. "Observation leaves traces even for those careful to conceal themselves, and sometimes these traces can be coaxed into revealing intent." He asked to see the sisters' schedule for the past week. They provided meticulous records, timing of prayers, meal arrangements, cleaning duties, and positions during Mass. Purbright's attention to detail revealed subtle inconsistencies, slight deviations from routine that, while easily overlooked by others, could have provided the Scarlet Sister with the means to move unnoticed. "It is in the minor adjustments," he said to Love, "that she found opportunity. A delay of a few minutes here, a shifted meal schedule there, nothing dramatic, but enough for someone observant to take advantage." From there, Purbright visited Mrs. Lenton, the florist, who had previously noted the Scarlet Sister's fascination with reflections. "She's very careful," Mrs. Lenton said, arranging a sprig of holly. "But last night I thought I noticed her looking less assured. She lingered near the mirror, then glanced quickly around before moving on, almost hesitant." Purbright's eyes narrowed slightly. "Hesitation is a weakness, Sergeant. Even the most careful observer cannot entirely disguise instinctive reactions, and it is precisely in such fleeting moments that we catch glimpses of intent. By midday, he arranged to visit the almshouses. The second red shoe still lay in its carefully cordoned location, but recent rainfall had partially washed away the surrounding footprints. Nevertheless, subtle depressions in the mud suggested movement in a deliberate pattern: approach, pause, touch, retreat. He traced the sequence carefully, noting the precision of placement and the unusual pauses, as if the observer were measuring reactions, not merely leaving a trace. "The pauses," Purbright said softly, "are the key. They suggest monitoring, anticipation, and control. She is orchestrating perception, watching how her actions influence the environment and its inhabitants." Love, increasingly impressed, asked, "Sir, is it possible she's testing us, seeing how we react to these clues?" "Entirely possible, Sergeant," Purbright replied. "And in doing so, she reveals not just her own behavior, but that of the town. Every reaction she provokes is information, catalogued perhaps, interpreted certainly." By afternoon, Purbright returned to headquarters and reviewed the diary once more. One passage in particular caught his attention, a detailed description of Sister Euphemia's hands during prayers, noting the slight tremor when she knelt, the adjustment of her rosary beads, the delicate alignment of the hymn book. "She observes the minutiae," Purbright murmured. "But in cataloguing the habits of others, she exposes herself through subtle repetition. The careful observer cannot help but leave patterns of their own." An idea formed. Purbright began planning a subtle test, a scenario designed to provoke a response, however minor, that could betray familiarity, intent, or identity. It required restraint, patience, and subtle manipulation of the town's ordinary routines. He instructed Love to discreetly monitor key locations: the market square, the chapel, the riverside, and the station. As evening approached, Purbright arranged a controlled situation. He prepared a small display at the town square, a pair of red shoes, a notebook similar to the diary, and a folded note with the familiar precise handwriting. The arrangement was deliberate yet natural, appearing as if inadvertently left by chance. It was an invitation, not a trap, a staged scene to draw attention without revealing the observer. From a concealed position nearby, Purbright and Love watched. Passers-by glanced curiously, some picking up items, others ignoring them. But then, as the last light faded, a figure approached. A woman, small, deliberate, moving with careful attention. She paused, adjusted her cloak, and bent slightly to examine the display. Her gaze lingered on the red shoes, then flicked to the notebook, and finally to the folded note. Purbright observed quietly. The woman's hands trembled slightly as she reached toward the display. Not out of fear, but familiarity, an instinctive recognition of her own handiwork. She adjusted the placement of one shoe, smoothed a crease in the note, and stepped back, scanning the surrounding streets. "She cannot help herself," Purbright whispered. "Her attention is drawn to what she orchestrated, and in doing so she betrays a measure of control and familiarity we can exploit." Love, watching from his concealed position, whispered, "Sir, that's her. That's the Scarlet Sister." "Indeed," Purbright said softly. And the briefest gesture, how she adjusted the shoe, how her eyes flicked to the note, confirms she knows the arrangement intimately. Observation and recognition are intertwined, and that is how we will narrow our field further. The woman lingered a moment longer, then melted into the shadows of King Street. Purbright waited until she was gone before emerging, noting the precise timing and manner of her movements. The trail, though indirect, provided confirmation of habitual patterns, preferred paths, reaction to staged cues, and subtle markers of intent. Back at headquarters, Purbright and Love reviewed the day's events. The Scarlet Sister had revealed more than she realized: recognition, deliberate pauses, careful adjustments, and controlled observation. Each detail contributed to a clearer understanding of her methods, if not yet her ultimate motive or identity. "Have her habits, her methods, and the range of her activity," Purbright said. But identity remains concealed. That is the final puzzle piece. All the rest, the red shoes, the notes, the diary, her staged appearances, are part of the prelude. The revelation, Sergeant, will come not from discovery alone, but from the subtle orchestration of human behaviour. As night fell over Flaxborough, the town lay quiet beneath a blanket of frost, unaware of the scrutiny that had grown so precise, so methodical. The Scarlet Sister, confident in her control, continued her nocturnal perambulations, oblivious that the observer she sought to manipulate had anticipated her gestures and catalogued her patterns with patient care. Purbright sat at his desk, a faint smile touching his lips. Each action of hers brought him closer to understanding. Each small gesture provided the thread he needed to unravel the carefully constructed web, and in the quiet of his office he allowed himself the satisfaction of knowing that patience, observation, and subtle manipulation would soon converge. The Scarlet Sister's game was intricate, but Flaxborough, and the inspector who observed it, was more so. The stage was set. All that remained was to draw the final threads together, to create a situation in which her habits, her care, and her compulsions would leave her exposed. The town, oblivious, continued its quiet routines, while the Scarlet Sister, somewhere in the frost-lit streets, moved with deliberate grace, unaware that the game was nearing its critical turning point. The following morning brought with it a brittle, clear light that reflected off frost-covered rooftops, lending Flaxborough the appearance of a miniature diorama. The town, though outwardly serene, hummed with an undercurrent of anticipation. Word of the Scarlet Sister's nocturnal activities had spread through whispers and innuendo. Even those indifferent to rumour moved with an almost self-conscious awareness of being watched. The game, carefully orchestrated, was entering its final stages, though no one yet understood it fully, not even those who had been most attentive. Purbright began his day at headquarters, reviewing the logs from Sergeant Love. Overnight, multiple townsfolk reported sightings of a cloaked figure near the chapel, the station, and the riverside, all consistent with previous observations, but now marked by a subtle change. The Scarlet Sister seemed less assured, her gestures slightly hesitant, her attention divided. It was as if she sensed, faintly, that her carefully cultivated stage was being observed by an equally careful eye. "Sir," Love said, frowning over. "The reports, she's being cautious, or nervous, or both. But the pattern is clear. She follows her own sequence, repeats her own gestures, and seems aware that someone may be watching." Purbright considered this. "Exactly, Sergeant. And that awareness is our advantage. The careful observer becomes predictable when they believe their audience is equally cautious. All that remains is to provide the conditions under which her predictability will betray her identity." By mid-morning, Purbright visited the convent. The sisters, having grown accustomed to his presence, were candid about recent minor disruptions: missing hymnals, slightly rearranged candlesticks, doors found ajar that had been secured. None of these incidents were dramatic, yet the pattern suggested deliberate exploration of private spaces. Purbright observed the ordinary movements of the nuns as they went about their day, noting where paths crossed and where habitual timings left small gaps. These gaps, he realized, were likely the routes the Scarlet Sister had used to move unseen. "Inspector," Sister Euphemia said quietly, "I feel as though someone watches even when I am alone. It is unsettling, yet when I look for them there is nothing. It is as though the very air is being observed." "Observation leaves traces," Purbright said gently, "and those traces, if subtle enough, can be coaxed into revealing more than the observer intends." After leaving the convent, he visited the Black Swan. Mr. Clements greeted him with a conspiratorial nod, as though sharing an understanding of the unspoken tension now inhabiting the town. Patrons whispered to one another about last night's sightings, embellishing details, yet all seemed to converge on the same notion. The Scarlet Sister's presence was carefully controlled, deliberate, and unnervingly precise. "Sir," Mr. Clements said, "people are starting to notice little inconsistencies in their routines. Doors left open, misplaced items, and of course the red shoes. Some claim to see them, some say they're gone. It's like the town itself is unsure of what is real." "Perception is the key," Purbright said softly. "The stage she has set is partly physical, partly psychological. The more we know, the more she senses scrutiny, the more predictable her responses will become." By afternoon, Purbright returned to the town square where he had staged a previous display of red shoes, mittens, and a folded note. Today, he expanded the arrangement slightly, adding a second notebook and a pair of gloves, all carefully positioned as if someone had inadvertently left them behind. He remained hidden nearby, with Love stationed out of sight. The purpose was simple: create a situation that would compel the Scarlet Sister to react, allowing her recognition and habits to reveal her identity. As dusk approached, movement stirred in the square. Shadows lengthened, and then a small figure appeared, cautious and deliberate, moving toward the arrangement. Purbright observed closely. The figure paused, glanced around, then bent slightly to examine the display. The red shoes were the first point of interest. Her fingers brushed them briefly, hesitated, and then adjusted one slightly. The gloves were examined next, then the notebooks. Each movement was precise, measured, and careful, yet unmistakably deliberate, an instinctive recognition of her own handiwork. "She cannot resist," Purbright whispered to Love. "Her attention is drawn to the familiar, and in doing so she betrays a subtle sense of ownership. Recognition, not concealment, guides her gestures." The figure moved to a notebook, flipping its pages delicately, as though checking for notes or entries that might have been altered. Her eyes flicked repeatedly to the surrounding streets, scanning for witnesses, and then she paused, adjusting her cloak in a precise manner. Every gesture, every micro-adjustment was consistent with the patterns Purbright had noted over the past week. Love's voice was barely audible. "Sir, that's definitely her." "Yes," Purbright said softly. And notice the hesitation, the care with which she interacts with the display, recognition and anticipation. This is how we narrow the field of suspects. She cannot help but behave predictably when confronted with familiar stimuli. That predictability is the key to revealing her identity. The woman lingered, bending over the notebooks again, her fingers tracing lines she likely remembered writing. Purbright noted the small adjustments, the way her eyes scanned the notebooks, how she held her coat tightly around her shoulders, how her boots struck the cobbles with subtle precision. These micro-behaviors, seemingly insignificant, were the hallmarks of a practiced observer acting within familiar routines. Finally, after several tense minutes, she straightened, took one last glance at the arrangement, and disappeared into the shadows of King Street. Purbright waited a moment, then emerged from his hiding place. "The trail is clear now," he said to Love. "We have confirmation of her methods, her habitual responses, and her comfort with the objects she created. The next step is to isolate the smallest inconsistencies, those tiny cracks in control, and we will find her." Love looked puzzled. "Sir, how do we know where she will go next?" Purbright smiled faintly. "We do not, but we know what compels her. Familiarity, control, recognition. We create a situation rich in those elements, and she will be drawn into it. That is human nature, Sergeant, predictable when her instincts are engaged. Purbright spent the remainder of the evening refining his plan. He considered the network of paths, the timing of routines, and the likelihood of her revisiting the stage display. By introducing minor variations, slightly altered positions of objects, subtle changes in timing, he could provoke a response that revealed her not merely by observation, but by instinct. Meanwhile, Flaxborough settled into its quiet evening. Rhythms. Shopkeepers locked their doors, windows reflected the last light, and children returned home from play. Yet beneath the ordinary routines, a subtle tension lingered, the sense that the town itself was part of a larger performance, one in which the Scarlet Sister had become both director and actor, and Purbright, patient and unobtrusive, was now carefully directing her steps. As night deepened, Purbright reviewed the diary, the notes, the red shoes, and the staged arrangements once more. The patterns were clear, and the threads that linked each incident were beginning to converge. Every gesture, every observation, every pause and adjustment could now be interpreted through the lens of human behavior he had been carefully documenting. "And so it approaches," he murmured, leaning back in his chair. "The moment when careful observation will become exposure, when habits betray intention, and when the culmination of small, deliberate acts will reveal the truth. Patience, subtlety, and timing. These are the tools that will bring the Scarlet Sister into the light." Outside, the wind carried a faint chill through the narrow streets of Flaxborough. The town lay in quiet anticipation, unaware that the final stage of a carefully orchestrated drama was about to unfold. The Scarlet Sister, confident in her mastery of observation and control, remained at large, yet her actions over the past hours had set the conditions for revelation. Purbright, ever patient, awaited the moment when human instinct would betray the carefully cultivated persona. He had created the stage, the props, and the subtle provocations. Now all that remained was to observe the response, catalogue it, and allow the smallest, most natural gesture to reveal what had been concealed for so long. The final act of the quiet, deliberate theatre in Flaxborough was about to begin. Flaxborough awoke to a crisp, still morning, the kind that renders the town both familiar and uncanny. Frost lingered in the shadows of the alleyways, glistening on shop windows and lending a quiet, reflective quality to the market square. The townsfolk moved with their habitual care, unconsciously measuring their routines against the invisible rhythms set by the Scarlet Sister. Yet today an undercurrent of expectation ran through the streets, subtle but palpable, as if the town itself awaited a resolution it could not articulate. Purbright arrived at headquarters, his expression calm but attentive. Sergeant Love had already prepared the reports from the previous evening, detailing sightings and the meticulous observations of the Scarlet Sister's interactions with the staged display in the square. "Sir," Love said, "she hasn't been seen since last night. Nothing. Not even a shadow. I was beginning to think she might have slipped away entirely." "Perhaps," Purbright replied. "Or perhaps she is positioning herself to respond precisely when we expect her to. Timing is as much a tool as observation in such cases, and we must remember, Sergeant, she is as careful with her movements as she is deliberate with her appearances. That is the very trait that will guide us to her." By mid-morning, Purbright visited the convent for a final review. The nuns had resumed their routines, though a quiet tension remained. Sister Euphemia, who had first reported the box, left at the back entrance, observed Purbright with a mix of respect and mild apprehension. "Inspector," she said, "there is a sense that something will be revealed today. I cannot explain why, but the air feels charged as though the ordinary is about to shift. Indeed, sister, Purbright replied. It is often in the ordinary that the extraordinary manifests, and when the extraordinary is orchestrated with precision, it cannot help but leave traces. Our task is to read them carefully. He examined the convent's records one last time, noting the minor deviations in timing that had allowed the Scarlet Sister to move undetected, the subtle rearrangements of hymnals, the slight variations in the order of prayers, the altered positioning of candles, each provided insight into the methodical nature of her observation. It was not malice that guided her, but a deliberate study of human behavior catalogued and enacted with meticulous care. Returning to the town square, Purbright found the staged display intact. The red shoes, mittens and notebooks remained in place, slightly rearranged by the morning wind. He inspected the positions carefully, noting how the elements had shifted imperceptibly. Small disturbances easily overlooked, yet significant. To an observer trained in detail, "Sergeant," Purbright said, "today we will not wait for her to appear merely to observe. We will introduce a subtle variable, something familiar but unexpected. Human instinct is compelled to respond, and when she responds, her gestures, small, deliberate, instinctive, will reveal all we need to know." Love followed, curious but wary. "Sir, how exactly will that work?" "We create a minor inconsistency," Purbright explained. "One that aligns with her expectations but deviates in a controlled way. She will perceive it immediately, and her response, unconscious yet deliberate, will betray her. The Scarlet Sister cannot resist responding to the familiar when it is presented differently." By mid-afternoon, Purbright positioned himself in a concealed location near the display. Love was stationed at the far end of the square, ready to assist, but out of sight. Purbright had subtly altered the positions of the shoes and notebooks. A shoe slightly tilted, a notebook partially opened at a blank page, a mitten resting in an unusual orientation. Each change was calculated, designed to provoke instinctive recognition without suggesting a trap. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the cobbles, movement appeared. The small figure approached cautiously, her steps measured, eyes scanning the square for both observation and reassurance. Her gaze settled on the red shoes first, then flicked to the mittens and finally to the notebooks. Purbright watched keenly. The woman's hand rose to adjust the slightly tilted shoe, an unconscious gesture of ownership. She bent toward the partially open notebook, fingertips tracing the blank page as though confirming the arrangement, then straightened, scanning the surrounding streets for witnesses. Her eyes, momentarily catching the reflection in a shop window, lingered with recognition. "She cannot resist," Purbright whispered to Love. "Every micro-gesture confirms familiarity, recognition, and instinctive control. Her habits are her undoing." The woman's cloak shifted slightly as she stepped closer to the display, rearranging the notebook and smoothing a crease in a note. Purbright noted the precise coordination of her hands and eyes, the subtle signs of someone deeply acquainted with the objects and the sequence of events they represented. "Now," Purbright said softly, "observe the next moment. The smallest deviation from her expected pattern will compel her to act, revealing what she intends to conceal." He had planted a final, subtle alteration. A second pair of red shoes, identical to the first, positioned just slightly askew and nearer the edge of the display. It was an imperceptible change, yet one that would trigger her compulsion to correct, adjust, and assert control. The Scarlet Sister's eyes narrowed as she noticed the second pair. Her steps quickened slightly, almost imperceptibly, as she bent, to align them with the original shoes. Her fingers trembled faintly, betraying a tension she could not suppress. Her head turned, scanning the streets, yet she lingered, compelled to finish the arrangement. Purbright, observing every micro-expression, gestured subtly to love. The plan was in motion. The compulsion, recognition, and instinctive control were converging. As the woman straightened, satisfied with her adjustments, she paused, her attention caught by Purbright's faint silhouette emerging from cover. Her eyes widened slightly, just long enough for Purbright to read the recognition flicker across her features. She stepped back, startled, yet composed herself immediately, adjusting her cloak with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to concealment. "Good evening, Miss M.H., Purbright said, his voice calm but precise. "I trust you found the arrangement satisfactory?" The woman's face paled imperceptibly. She inclined her head, maintaining her composure. "Inspector Purbright," she said softly. "I didn't expect anyone to be observing." "Of course," Purbright replied. "Observation is always mutual, though not always apparent. You have orchestrated events with care, yet small deviations and instinctive gestures are revealing. It is the ordinary that betrays the extraordinary." Her eyes darted toward the objects she had arranged, red shoes, mittens, notebooks, then back to Purbright. There was a moment of hesitation, a brief acknowledgement that her meticulous control had faltered. "You have been very thorough," Purbright continued, cataloguing habits, observing routines, leaving clues while remaining unseen. Yet the very traits that allow you to manipulate perception also reveal your familiarity. Micro-gestures, instinctive corrections, habitual pauses, these are as telling as words, if one knows how to read them. For a moment, the Scarlet Sister said nothing, her composure returning slowly. Then she sighed, almost imperceptibly, and allowed a faint, rueful smile. "It seems," she said quietly, "that Flaxborough has finally found someone who observes more carefully than I do." Purbright inclined his head politely. "Indeed. And now, having observed your methods, your patterns, and your compulsion to correct and adjust, we can bring the matter to its proper conclusion. The stage was set, and you unwittingly played your part perfectly." The townsfolk, who had begun to notice a quiet commotion in the square, gathered cautiously, sensing the culmination of the long series of events. There was no drama, no melodrama, merely a subtle resolution, the quiet satisfaction of understanding, and the restoration of ordinary routines now informed by the knowledge of careful observation and hidden motives. The Scarlet Sister, composed but subdued, followed Purbright toward headquarters. There was no need for force. The revelation had been achieved through subtle orchestration, the careful manipulation of human behavior, and the patient, observant patience of an inspector who never rushed and never revealed all at once. As the day waned, Flaxborough resumed its ordinary rhythms. The shops opened and closed as usual, the cobbles were swept, and the market square returned to its quiet, reflective calm. Yet beneath the surface, subtle changes lingered, a heightened awareness, a recognition of observation, and the faint knowledge that even ordinary routines could conceal extraordinary intentions. Purbright returned to his office, settling once more into the quiet rhythm of paperwork, the satisfaction of a case methodically resolved settling into his thoughts. Outside, the town carried on, unaware of how close it had come to a careful unravelling, and yet subtly altered by the events of the past days. And somewhere, perhaps, the Scarlet Sister reflected on the ingenuity of patient observation and the inevitability that even the most careful manipulator could be revealed by instinctive human gestures and subtle deviations from the ordinary. The quiet resolution of the case, understated yet complete, returned Flaxborough to its accustomed order, the ordinary once again prevailing over the extraordinary, leaving only the faint trace of careful orchestration and the subtle reminder of human nature's inevitability.